Today's aim is that students will be able to represent and solve real-world problems with all operations with rational numbers by writing an expression. Some key vocabulary. An expression is just a mathematical phrase that contains numbers, variables, and operators. An equation is a statement that the values of two expressions are equal, indicated by the sign equals. Some key points. Expressions and equations can be used to represent and solve problems in both mathematics and real-world situations that are expressed as negative values. For example, debt, negative temperatures, and a decrease in altitude. So let's look at example number 1. The toughest part about these problems is figuring out which operation should you do. A scuba diver starts at an elevation of 0 feet and descends at a constant rate of negative 3.5 feet per second. I'm going to circle my numbers and their units. I'm going to underline keywords like constant rate and descends, which makes me tell you it's negative. And I'm going to then box my answer once I finish reading part A. Part A, write and simplify an expression to determine how far a scuba diver will descend after 4 seconds. So descending 4 seconds, how far? So if I think of drawing a picture, here's my scuba diver on top of the water. Here's time 0. Every 1 second, he decreases by 3.5 feet. He drops 3.5 feet. And so the question is, after 4 seconds, how far has he gone down? Well, we could add up negative 3.5 plus negative 3.5 plus negative 3.5 plus negative 3.5, or we could multiply. It's going to be a lot faster. So I'll do negative 3.5 times 4. 5 times 4 is 20. Negative 3, we know is going to end up with a negative answer. So 3 times 4 is 12 plus 2 is 14. We know it's going to be negative because we have 2 different signs. And we know we need to put our decimal point right here because there's one number after the decimal place. So we have negative 14.0, and we need to make sure we include our units. So he dropped 14 feet. He descended 14 feet, or negative 14 feet. Then it says, how long will it take for a scuba diver to reach an elevation of negative 28 feet? So now we're going to do the same thing, except now we're trying to figure out how many seconds would it take. Well, there's a couple ways we can do this. One way we can do this is realize that 28 is double 14. So if it took 4 seconds to go 14 feet, it'll take double that, 8 seconds to go 28 feet. So we know it's going to take 8 seconds. Another way we could figure this out is to divide. Okay, we're going to work backwards. We're at 28 feet, negative 28, divided by, we know they go negative 3.5 feet per second. A negative divided by a negative will be a positive. We know that when we have a decimal in our divisor, we need to move it over. So if I have it over here, I need to move it over 1, add a 0. So how many times does 35 go into 280? Well, if we work it out, we can do a little experimenting over on the side, and we'll find out that 35 goes into 288 times. 8 times 35 is 280. So we know, we've confirmed it will take 8 seconds. Let's look at the next example. The table shows an average temperatures for the months of January and February for 3 states. Which state had the biggest change in temperatures from January to February? So we're looking for which state, either Alaska, Florida, or Wyoming. When we're looking for change tells us we're going to need to subtract. We want to find out how much did it change from January to February. And the way we're going to subtract is by taking the later date minus the earlier date. So the end point minus the starting point. So for Alaska, we're going to do 5.2 minus negative 11. Well, we know that minus and negative is just positive. And if we add those together, we end up with 16.2 degrees Fahrenheit. So Alaska changed 16.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's check out Florida. Florida went from 46.9 to 58.1. So it increased, and we know it should be positive, just like Alaska. So 58.1 minus 46.9. Well, let's do that over here to the side. We have 58.1 minus 46.9. We're going to need to borrow 1 here. That's going to give us 2, subtract 1, minus 1, and put our decimal point. So Florida changed by 11.2 degrees Fahrenheit. It increased, so it's positive. And then we look at Wyoming. Now, Wyoming went from negative 3.4 degrees to negative 20.2. It dropped in temperature. So we know the answer here should be negative. We're going to have negative 20.2, that's our end point, minus our starting point, minus a negative 3.4. We know that minus a negative is the same as plus a positive. We have different signs, so we're going to need to subtract. So I'm going to do 20.2 minus 3.4. I'm going to need to borrow 1 here and borrow another 1 here. So this is going to give me 10. If I borrow 1, it's going to be 9. 12 minus 4 gives me 8. 9 minus 3 is 6, and bring down my 1. So Wyoming decreased. We know it's negative because this one is larger. Decreased by 16.8 degrees Fahrenheit. So which one changed the most? Well, here Wyoming changed the most. It didn't go positive. It's not the largest number, but it changed the most. It decreased by the most. So we'll say Wyoming changed the most in temperature. Now it's ready. Now it's time for you to practice one.